You're listening to the I Love You Keep Going podcast with George Haas. For more information, please visit our website at www.mettagroup.org. That's www.mettagroup.org.
So welcome, everybody. This is I Love You Keep Going. It's Thursday, July 17th, 2025. It's 7:35 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. And I thought tonight what I would talk about is authenticity. It's such a funny thing, authenticity. uh, and in some sense, simple if your experience was that your authentic self was appreciated, and not so easy if it wasn't. um, I like the Edward Albee phrase, "Bumble of Joy." Do you know what it's from his play American Dream, about the disappointment of the caregivers in their not their bundle of joy, their bumble of joy. Uh, we're born, we're completely dependent on who takes care of us, how they come to us. We don't have much of a capacity for self-reflection. We really rely on the mirror of somebody else to reflect back to us who we are. And we learn from that reflection, actually, who we are. And we begin to construct a sense of self based on that. And so the qualities that we express and are experienced by the caregiver that are then interpreted by the caregiver and reflected back to us become that essential understanding of who we are. And so from the attachment perspective, if you had resourced caregivers who were rested and could be responsive to you, pretty much every aspect of you is delightful, and every aspect of you is welcome, and every aspect of you is responded to in such a way that you feel actually no inhibition about expressing it. That flow of authenticity, you can just be how you are, and with the expectation that that will be received and that people will respond to it. That loop is, I make this gesture, somebody pays attention to it, they interpret the meaning of it. In infancy, of course, you're expressing needs for care, but you don't have any cognitive mind to be able to understand that. You're just expressing, and hopefully the caregiver is receiving that, interpreting it correctly, and then responding with the care. And it's that loop of expression, interpretation, and response. We really want to have the sense that we affect the people that matter to us. That's that essential quality of authenticity. But then, of course, if you didn't have that, if you didn't have a caregiver who was able to respond to you, then those natural inclinations, those natural expressions, that effortless authenticity is reflected back to you in a different way, rather than all of your gestures being welcome, all of them being interesting, all of them being something to respond to. We learn something else. And then depending on what that reflection was, we begin to adapt. There is this, I think that the Freudians would call it the death drive, but it's really the life drive. You want to survive, even in infancy, you want to survive. If you make the decision not to, you just give up. Failure to thrive is what we call it. You waste away. But most of us are very tenacious in our demand for life, even in that early place. And we're adaptable. And the first thing we abandon is our authenticity. If that isn't getting us what we want, and we become sensitive to what the caregiver needs, and then we begin to communicate in the terms that our caregiver prefer. But it isn't painless. It isn't a simple sleight of hand. We abandon ourselves at great cost, at great distress. And we become who they want us to be at great cost, at great distress. And what that translates into is long after the time when we needn't have done that anymore. We continued to do it. It's just when you begin to have that perspective, when you begin to see it. If you've sat with me at all, you know that I call it the terrible sadness, the sadness of recognition that long after you didn't need to be somebody else, long after you could have been yourself, you didn't, because you understood that the only way to get the things that you needed in life was to be that person who you became. The false self. The other part of it, of course, is you develop the false self. You hone it. You make it good at getting the things that you need. But your authentic self doesn't have that attention, doesn't have those resources. And so it doesn't develop. So you can't just make this dramatic switch from inauthenticity to authenticity because your authentic self isn't so capable as the inauthentic self. Is that all making sense? You know, depending on which variety of it is, you sense into what the other person wants, and then you pretend to be that so that they'll be interested in you. And then if they are interested in you, of course, they're not interested in you. They're interested in who you pretended to be. You can't suddenly throw the cloak of inauthenticity off and say, ta-da, here I really am. Because actually, they don't want that. They want who you pretended to be. So you're going to begin to have to renegotiate all of your relationships if you're moving from inauthenticity to authenticity. It's not such a big shift a lot of the times. You could have done it all along. That's part of the terrible sadness, the recognition that all along I could have been my authentic self and I could have navigated the world from that place. And I could have been actually much more successful in getting my needs met in the way that it really mattered to me had I been able to do that. But I couldn't do that. It's part of it is the way that we develop the capacity to reflect on these things. This human condition, we don't really have the cognitive ability to make these kinds of reflections until we're in our mid-20s. You know, earlier on, we're compliant, really. In attachment terms, we have that first 3 years of life where we develop the basic structure of attachment and the understanding of the nature of the attachment mechanism in our family system. And then mid-childhood arrives, that period when the autobiographical memory comes alive. Can you think back to your earliest memories? How old were you when that happened? I have a very distinct memory of drawing a 4 on a piece of paper and showing it to my mother and her saying, "I bet you can't do it again." And me interpreting that as I couldn't do it again. And when I talked to her about it later, she said, no, she was meaning to be encouraging me to do it again. But it wasn't do it again. You can do it again. It was, I bet you can't, which is an interesting formulation. But I remember my brother, um, my older brother, standing in the doorway of the house and asking my mother to walk him to school, and my mother saying that she wasn't going to do it and that he would have to get there on his own. So he would have been 5. So I would have been 2.5 or 3 or something like that. Maybe I was 4 and he was 6, something like that. And I don't remember that much. So the earliest part of memory started then, and then later it filled in. I remember uh, climbing up the stairs at Lincoln School and saying to my mother, "Why didn't you send me to kindergarten? I think I would like to have gone to kindergarten." And I was looking into the window of the kindergarten's room and all the kids running around. And she said, "We sent you to kindergarten. You went to kindergarten." Why don't I remember that? Well, it was because they sent me a year early to school, so I was 4 when I went to kindergarten, and so 5 in first grade. So I don't remember first grade either. So 6, second grade is the first thing I remember. Can you remember in your own experience of life where that happened? That piece of autobiographical memory coming online, right? It's a whole change in capacity from that early childhood experience. And then you're engaged in uh, the social experimentation of forming relationships in school. And how did that go? You don't, of course, recognize that it's based on your early attachment conditioning, the way in which you perceive the world. And your capacity for authenticity has already been sculpted in the family system that you're in, and you show up with the skill set that you have. But then how did that go? Were you somebody who easily found social connection in the world opened to you, and you actually were good at the system of teaching that you encountered, that you could learn in the way that you were being taught, or something else going on? I think it's quite interesting that um, the school systems. Well, I went to school in the 50s, in elementary school in the 50s, and it was that post-war period where they were really organizing public education to be something that trained you to fit into the economy, which was a shift away from the pre-war period where you were actually supposed to develop an interest in humanities and an interest in knowledge. That went by the wayside, and we moved into a place of uh, how are you going to fit in to this new experimental global economy. And did you have the aptitude that they wanted you to have? This is another one of those pressures on your authenticity. Uh, what if you didn't? And then what you notice is that the resources aren't available to you. You have to go do something else. How did that fit with you, what you wanted, and how you might have expressed yourself authentically? What were those interests that you had, and how were they received? The playground can be a brutal place. I think back. My mother was an arch conservative, and I lived in a fairly liberal area. You could, I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago, and you could tell the orientation of the households because they delivered the Chicago Tribune and the Chicago Sun-Times. And all of the conservative households, the Tribune was laying on the front door. Uh, they call those, everybody had them because it was Chicago and you had to be able to scrape the snow off or the mud off. Doormats. on your doormat was a Tribune or a Sun Time, and you could orient yourself to that world. I remember my mother dutifully giving us all Goldwater badges to take to school and putting it on with no understanding, and also being one of three people in the school. Everyone else had Kennedy badges. uh, I'll tell you a funny story, just to acquaint you to the way that I think about how all of this media, all of this information, it just gets you without you even knowing. I got a dog. I haven't had a dog before, and so it came with the name Cricket, which I thought was an impossible name, and so I went through a series of different names to consider for the dog, and finally arrived on Lucy. And then one day I was thinking, well, let me see what the most popular name for dogs are. And I Googled it, and Lucy was the number one name for a female dog. And I thought, oh my God, it got through. And all of my defenses, all of my elaborate self talk that says I'm not really being soaked in the information stream of the culture that I live in. And I pick the most popular name for my dog, just completely unconsciously. So all of this stuff, even if you don't notice it seeping in, it's getting at you from everywhere. And we have this sense of a culture, and we have this sense of these societies that we grow up in that we want to be part of later in life when we can, and the societies that we are put into by the family systems that we grow up in. And there we are. How well did we do? And in how bristly did people become with your authentic expression? And how frightening did that make you? And so you began to hide it away. And did you hide it so well that it's not even available to yourself anymore? Did you have a sense of this is really who you are? This is the sense of what you could express. Um, in At the end of childhood, and we know this through puberty is the experience of it. There's a lot of secondary changes in the body, um, uh, which are visible externally, but one of the big changes is the way that your mind functions. The child's brain is this warren of axons which are just disconnected. And the reason for that is that we can absorb an amazing amount of information because of the structure of the brain, but it's very slow thinking. It's very slow reasoning. And so this big change that happens in puberty is this radical pruning back to only the things that are connected, only the information that you already have, which allows you to think at a much higher level than you could with that child's brain. And it really provides for you the first opportunity to look back on the conditioning, look back on the childhood experiences, and to make this evaluation. Did the caregivers take care of me in a way that was really useful to me, that was intended to help me, or did the caregivers take care of themselves at my expense during the course of childhood? And if you arrive at this place of they took care of themselves at my expense, it breaks the epistemic trust. So epistemic trust is where you believe that somebody else is telling you the truth, and you believe that they have your interest in mind in the things that they're telling you. And this is essential for learning, but it's also essential for authenticity. In order to be who you are, you have to believe that people will receive you and value that experience and care for it. And if you don't believe that, it makes it very challenging to present yourself authentically because it feels too vulnerable. And when it's the family system that creates that sense of mistrust, then it's very difficult to translate into a world outside of the family system where that trust is available to you. So then you manage life where you don't actually ever tell anybody what's authentically happening for you, but you also don't think that it's a good idea to do that. And actually, you think the smart choice is not to. So you're going to have to change your mind about that if that's what's happened. But do it with great care because you want people that do see you and value you and have a sense of curiosity and care for who it is that you really are and what is it about you that's unique. But by the time we're in our early to mid 20s where we have the capacity to do this, there's a lot of conditioning behind it. And it's easy enough to go into life with these points of view and not do much about them, depending on how well you can get it to work. So rather than intimacy, you have transactional relationships rather than, well, if you're disorganized, of course, you don't have transactional relationships so much as reenactments of original trauma. How do you shift out of that? That's the idea. How do you shift out of it into a place where you can be effortlessly authentic? That's, I think, in the end, the place to get to. Now, why would you even want to is maybe a question that we should answer. Why would you even want to be authentic and vulnerable with people? Because that's the place of meaning. If you live your life without meaning, of course, it's easier to do it when you're younger. As you get older, it becomes progressively more challenging to live a life without real meaning because the limitations of the body get in the way. How do I get out of bed? How do I push through these aches and pains to carry on with this life that doesn't really mean that much to me? It gets harder and harder. And that when you have that youthful energy, it's easy to distract with sense pleasure, we like to say. But as you get older, that sense pleasure gets a less compelling. Um, what's going to be meaningful? What is it that's going to carry you forward? What is it that you're going to feel the sense of fulfillment in doing is the thing that allows you to carry on, which means you begin to notice that the lack of authentic expression means that you don't get that meaning that much. And so you have to reorient around that. What is it that really matters to me? As you age, you have less energy. Quite a bit less. Astonishingly less. Now, I remember my 20s, I worked 2 full-time jobs and went out at night. That's not happening. So you begin to represent yourself authentically. And what you're going to notice is that there's conditioning around it. Some things, I like to use the Minesweeper, this old PC game, as a metaphor. It's a grid, and sometimes you click on a square and half the board opens up, and it's really effortless to move into authenticity. And sometimes you click on a square and everything lights up. There's a lot of conditioning. It's very painful to begin to shift into saying what really matters to you. And if you've really kept it secret the whole time, it's not normalized at all. And then it becomes shocking how unnecessary it was for most things to keep them so protected, so private. It was in your family system, it was growing up, but later it wasn't. That's the terrible sadness that kicks in, takes you little by little, one time, 10 times, 100 times. You make the expression and you reclaim it, that peace, and then you don't have the abandonment, the terror responding when you say it. That's really the gauge, the threshold, right? Can you say something that's authentic without being frightened that the people close to you will abandon you for saying it? And I don't know that we ever get completely free of that, but we need to get it low enough that it doesn't prevent us from saying it. When the fear of being abandoned is so high that we can't make the expression, of course, we never settle, we never really feel safe because we haven't said what we needed to. When you can't ask for what you need, of course, you don't get it most of the time. When you can ask for things, but they're not really the authentic thing that you need, you get gestures, you get what you ask for often, but because it isn't centered in your authenticity, you don't get the actual thing that would matter, that would let you settle. And really what we're trying to get to is this place where we feel secure in our connection to somebody else, that we could be unguarded and effortlessly authentic, and they would not abandon us. But if you never tell them all of that, you never know whether they will or not, and it keeps you in that edge, that anxiety about whether they would or wouldn't. And it's funny, you see people that were always received, always had caregivers that were okay with who they were, that just let them be, that encouraged them and helped them. They don't really have this sense of inauthenticity. They never learned to be inauthentic. They're just themselves. It's the rest of us that learned this duality, this inauthenticity. And you weren't wrong at the time. It was required. There was no choice in this. You needed to do it. And so you did. And you did well enough at it. Well enough at it that there's a lot of conditioning that makes it hard to be free. At the end of this, and this is because we're in this meditative context, really ultimately what we're talking about is freedom, the freedom to be effortlessly authentic, and the expectation that that will be received in such a way that will be useful. But even if it isn't, that we'll manage it, right? That we'll be able to find in the world a society that we can fit into, that we can be authentic in the way we need to be. So then the question is, how far down the rabbit hole of inauthenticity have you gone? And is it so far down that you've lost track of what it is that's authentically interesting to you? Yael, are we to interpret that as sarcastic? Do you see in the chat? Now, doesn't that sound nice? It reminds me of my grandmother, actually. And she would have meant it sarcastically. That's why I'm asking. Hilarious. I wonder about that. I didn't grow up in a household where I could be who I was too much. Um, Now, I didn't have parents who thought that they were doing me a disservice. They thought that they were directing me in a way that would be useful to me. But um, what they didn't have was the insight into uh, the way that they were directing me is what they needed and what meant something to them, but did not to me. They weren't curious about who I was and what mattered to me. They wanted to shape me so that I would be uh, a good family member, which admittedly, uh, uh, I grew up in a very upwardly mobile family that my grandparents grew up very poor, and they wanted that upward movement that the American dream promised. My mother's mother was Canadian. She grew up in Alberta on a wheat field. Uh, she said to me, "You'll never understand how I grew up." But one uh, morning when I was 17, and I had to stoop to get out of the front door of this log cabin with a sod roof where we all lived in one room. And she was 4'10". Stood in the front yard. I turned 360 degrees, and the voice inside of my head said, "You got to get the hell out of here." Uh, that was that drive. And so they climbed up, and I grew up from that height that they'd climbed up to. And what they needed from me is that I continued to do that. So that was the direction, but uh, it wasn't that related to who I was and what I could do, even. So then you begin uh, to take the risks to discover what it is that might be really meaningful to you, and you organize your life in such a way that you can pursue that. And then you discover who can hear that and who can't hear that. And so there is some guardedness in that, some protection, because you were just beginning. And then you express to the people that actually see the value of that, these beginnings of your exploration, these beginnings of your authentic expression, and you do more and more of it until this confidence arises that you can be who you are, and you will find the people that you need to find who will value that and encourage that and support that. But it is just as easy to find people who will reject it in the same old way and discourage it in the same old way. And you have to be careful about that and not pick those people to go to. Uh, I notice, depending on how much involvement you still have in your family system, your origin system, that the first place you might think to go is there, but it might not be the best choice. See me, finally, see me, would you already? Uh, uh, and often that isn't what happens. We as children adopt these views of our caregivers in a way that makes them into the good caregivers, and it's important to begin to see them the way that they are. I don't mean that in a negative way, but there is often a child. There's still often a child's distortion of who the caregivers are that we needed in childhood in order to preserve that uh, understanding that we had capable caregivers. Have you ever met somebody who decided in childhood that they couldn't rely on their caregivers and the anxiety that that has carried with them all their lives? It's a natural defense for us to assign capabilities to them that they may not have expressed because it's less anxiety provoking for us. But now we need to begin to see them clearly and what their capacities are, what they can do and what they can't do, so that we don't personalize the idea that they're withholding from us something that they could give us that we want. We want to see what they have to give, but they don't have to give. So often, the things that we need from them that they're unable to give us poison through their absence, the things that they can give us. And so we reject what they have to offer because it isn't what we needed, wasn't what we really need now. So we want to change that. We also want to touch into what our authentic need is. What is it that we really need, and see how well it maps onto their capacities. And if it doesn't map on so well, that's where we need to turn toward other people and have other people take care of us so that we don't always come back in this state of deprivation where our needs aren't being met. And what feels better than sulking? Stomping around, feeling piteous. Not much. Seeing clearly what they can do and what they can't do, allowing them to do what they can do, and all of the rest of the need that we have that isn't met, take to other people who can meet it, so that we're fulfilled in that way. And that will then become a basis of our authentic expression that we can then use to orient how we explore the world, how we gather what we need to know so that our life has a sense of purposefulness to it. Is that all making sense? The idea is to be free. And what that really means is to be freely authentic, understanding that you won't be abandoned, and how you have confidence that people won't abandon you is because you're authentic and they don't leave. It's the only way. And all of those little bits that you don't express, that you reserve because you're too frightened of expressing it, are the source of that unrelenting anxiety that you carry around. So you just express it. Now, obviously, through the frame of right speech. There's no licensing of being an asshole here. Is it true? Is it timely? Is it helpful? Is it kind? That's the expression. So I like to say, love people and feed them, you know. It's action oriented. How's that? Enough said on this topic. Shall we do some meditation practice? What would you like to do? We have three choices around here: loving kindness practice, insight, and ideal parent figure. One, two, or three? So we have loving kindness sweeping the election with 66 and a third percent. Or two-thirds. All right. So go ahead and take your meditation posture. So let go of the meditation. How's that?
Excellent.
I'm glad.
Talking about authenticity before doing the meta for self is very nice.
I'm glad.
Yeah.
So let's see what's coming up. On August 9th, I'm starting a series of meditation and addiction level 1. So that's on Saturday mornings from 9 to 1, the 9th, the 16th, and the 23rd. We started a meditation and attachment level 2 class. Today was the second class, but if you're interested in jumping into a level 2 class, we would still let you into that. Then, let's see here. On September 13th, we're going to start the exploration meditations again. So on the 13th and the 20th, we'll have I like to call it intermediate mentalizing and advanced mentalizing, but it really is the discussion is around exploration. Once you get the basic set of mentalizing down, you move into the intermediate level and the advanced level. Intermediate level really lets you explore what is meaningful to you in the advanced level. If you're interested in meditation, will open up that world to you. We're going to do a workshop on the 19th, which is a Friday, talking about our approach. Actually, we're going to do a workshop on the 5th of August, well, 5th of September, and that will carry us into a meditation and addiction level 2 that starts on the 15th of September. So if you have addiction issues and you're interested in a meditation and attachment approach for that, that's when the level 2 is starting. And I think that that's carrying us all the way through the summer. We do have Kaleidoscope if you're interested in meeting with our Sangha once a month. It's on the fourth Friday of the month at 11 to 12:30. So the one for July is coming up on the 25th. Anyway,
I'm thinking of joining Kaleidoscope.
oh yeah, good. It's a good group. We do some practice. There's some opportunity for having questions about your practice answered, and then I usually have a topic. Let's see. What is the topic for this Kaleidoscope coming up?
You sent out a whole list of topics for the next 6 months. It looked pretty good.
Oh, good. Yeah, we did. So, how to navigate sex. Oh, that was June. We already talked about that.
Oh, I'm glad I missed it.
Reclaiming play, joy, and creativity in adult life. So we're going to talk about exploration. Play is another term. Play is another word for exploration. But also in relationships, play is really a marvelous dynamic. So that we'll talk about that. Thanks for coming. Really appreciate your practice. I offer the teaching freely, but I do hope if you can, you'll make a donation. There's a link on the website for that. It helps support me and also the work Mettagroup is doing. I hope to see you soon on the path. Appreciate you. Bye.